My name is James. Today, for the first time in 13 years, I've returned to my hometown. After putting the single card in my hand back into its envelope and tucking it into my bag, I take a step forward. The area around the station has changed so much that it feels like I've come to a completely unfamiliar place. As if to shake off this emptiness, I walk through the drastically transformed streets, occasionally catching glimpses of nostalgic scenery mixed in. Some old shops still remain, and within the new scenery, I spot a park where I used to play as a child. It really does bring back memories. I mutter to myself without thinking. It wasn't that I had deliberately avoided this place, but I also hadn't made any effort to come back. The reason I made the trip this time was to attend a middle school reunion. The card I put in my bag is the invitation to the reunion. Since moving away, I haven't had many opportunities to meet up with my old classmates. So I'm looking forward to seeing them again after such a long time. At the same time, I can't help but think of a particular classmate whose face has lingered in my mind for years. Her actions back then troubled me deeply, and even now, they remain like a thorn in my heart. Her name is Emily. She was a classmate in middle school, and back then, she was so prominent that no one in the school didn't know her. The daughter of a well-known local family, she was the heir to a large company her father ran. On top of that, she was perfect in every way: academics, sports, appearance, you name it. She truly embodied the idea of living in a completely different world. To me, she always felt out of reach, almost otherworldly. She was so perfect that I couldn't even see her as being in the same category of human as myself. It was at that time that I vaguely began to realize there are people in this world who are simply chosen. Perhaps because of the vast gulf between us, the feelings I had toward Emily were more like she has nothing to do with me. Back then, I always found it strange why someone as extraordinary as Emily would attend a run-of-the-mill public school like ours. With her family, intellect, and appearance, it would have been natural for her to attend a prestigious private school for the sake of her future. So why was she at an ordinary school like ours? It was a mystery to me, and it was also a topic of mild curiosity among our classmates. But there was one thing that puzzled me even more. Emily went out of her way to mess with me. And it wasn't in a friendly or affectionate way. It was blatantly hostile. She would always approach me when I was alone. With her calm demeanor and casual tone, anyone who happened to see us would probably think it was nothing unusual. Some even said they envied me for being close to the most popular girl in school. But what she said to me was harsh, to say the least. Her attitude toward me was consistently condescending. And it always happened when no one else was around. Her words were filled with a mix of outright boasting and cutting remarks aimed at belittling me. There were even moments when her gaze carried an eerie intensity, as if she held some kind of grudge against me. Even though we were in the same class, I never figured out what she was really thinking. My confusion only grew as the year went on. That one year left me with what I can only describe as bitter memories of middle school, memories that still linger in my heart. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes find myself thinking back to those days. Of course, I have no way of knowing what Emily was thinking back then. Will she be at the reunion today? Honestly, I still find her difficult to deal with. The thought of seeing her again makes me uneasy. But at the same time, if she were to approach me like she used to, I'd want to know her true intentions. Lost in these thoughts, I finally arrive at the reunion venue. There's still about 20 minutes until it starts, but I can already hear the buzz of voices from the entrance. And it's clear a lot of people have already gathered. After checking in at the reception, I step inside the venue. As I look around, I notice a small crowd forming in one corner. So, you did come after all. Through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of the person at its center. Radiating an aura that could rival any celebrity, that spot seemed to shine brighter than anywhere else. It was Emily, our first meeting in 13 years. She really does live in a different world. Even among the many elegantly dressed women, she stood out with an unmistakable presence. Every one of her movements was graceful, effortlessly drawing and holding people's attention. Watching her polished gestures, I couldn't help but feel like I was witnessing a scene from a movie or drama. The atmosphere around her felt entirely distinct. Then, Emily turned her gaze toward me. The moment our eyes met, my heartbeat quickened slightly. It wasn't because I was captivated by her beauty. If I had to describe it, it felt more like a frog caught under the glare of a snake. I braced myself, wondering what she might say. With a faint smile, she rose from her seat and walked straight toward me. Stopping right in front of me, she spoke in the same tone I remembered from middle school. "Why did you stop coming to school? And why did you suddenly move away?" In that instant, I was certain. Emily hadn't changed at all. 13 years is a long time, and circumstances might have shifted. Perhaps she had forgotten all about middle school. Or maybe, as an adult, she had reflected on her actions back then and felt some remorse. I had vaguely entertained such possibilities, but this encounter with Emily, frozen in time since those days, vividly brought my middle school years rushing back. The bitter memories resurfaced with startling clarity. "For not seeing each other in 13 years, that's a pretty abrupt question," I replied. "Is it, though?" Emily narrowed her eyes, smiling as she waited expectantly for my answer. "One of the reasons I stopped going to school was, in fact, Emily. My father ran a small, old-fashioned factory in the local shopping district that specialized in producing screws. Though the factory looked worn out, my father's craftsmanship was renowned. And his screws were so highly regarded that even major companies placed orders with him. My biological mother had passed away when I was very young, and my father managed the factory alongside his second wife, Anna. Anna was a kind woman who raised me as if I were her own, treating me no differently than the younger brother born after she married my father. Since I had little memory of my biological mother, I believed wholeheartedly that Anna was my real mother. Although we weren't wealthy, we lived a content and happy life as a family. But one day, a Chinese-owned screw factory opened in a neighboring town. Companies that had long done business with my father began switching to the cheaper Chinese screws in an effort to cut costs. Despite my parents' best efforts, they couldn't keep up with the competition, where prices were nearly half of what they charged. Eventually, my father told us, "It's becoming too difficult to keep the business going." After that, the factory was shut down. Soon after, our family moved to my father's rural hometown. In the countryside, my father's relatives were engaged in farming, and my now unemployed parents began helping with their work. Leaving the town I'd grown up in was sad, but once we moved, I realized that the fresh rural air felt like the best medicine for my then fragile health. When the move was announced, people in town sympathized with us over the factory's closure. So when my father said that the business can't survive anymore, I didn't question it. However, the day before we moved, a neighbor told me, "I hope your health gets better soon after the move." Looking back later, I realized the move was because of my illness. Around the second semester of 8th grade, I began falling ill more frequently. Despite having had near-perfect attendance before, I started missing school more often during that time. Visits to the local doctor yielded no answers, and even after switching hospitals and undergoing various tests, nothing abnormal was found. Ultimately, I was diagnosed with a psychosomatic condition. Upon learning this, my parents decided to change my environment entirely, hoping it would help. To ensure I wouldn't feel responsible, they used the factory's financial struggles as the reason for our move. Right after my graduation, we relocated to the countryside. Even as a child, I knew my father's skill as a screwmaker was highly regarded. I took pride in his work, and knowing that my condition had forced him to give it up filled me with guilt. And yet, there was also a part of me that felt relief. After the move, my health remained unstable, so I didn't attend high school. Instead, I helped my father with farming. On our days off, my younger brother joined us in the fields. Later, my brother started his own company after graduating from college. He developed and commercialized various products for our parents. such as equipment to make farming easier and automated systems that adjusted temperature and drainage during heavy rain based on weather forecasts. Now, I work there alongside him. Hey, why is that? Emily's voice snapped me back to reality in an instant. I heard you holed up in the countryside. What exactly have you been doing? She pressed me with insistent questions, as though she was eagerly anticipating something. I knew that telling her the truth would only result in mockery or amusement. While I could handle being ridiculed personally, I couldn't stomach the idea of her making light of my family's struggles. With that in mind, I withheld the details of my illness and family circumstances and simply said, "A lot happened. I didn't go to high school and just worked." This response seemed to satisfy her. The moment I said it, her eyes lit up. "So, in other words, you ran away from your hometown. And you only have a middle school diploma?" If it were me, I'd be too embarrassed to show my face at something like this. Looking around, I noticed that the other classmates had gathered around our former teacher, who had arrived late. Before I realized it, Emily and I were the only ones in this corner of the room. She had always been like this since middle school. She would wait until I was alone and then hurl insults at me. When I was with friends, she would interact with me politely, just like any other classmate. But the moment I was alone, her demeanor would change entirely. That's why no one else, not even the teachers, had ever seen this cruel side of her. To everyone else, she was the perfect model student, someone beyond reproach. Emily hadn't changed at all in the 13 years since middle school. Some things never change, even after 13 years. Are you listening? Or are you just staying silent because you have nothing to say back? As Emily continued her relentless jabs, I felt a twinge of exhaustion. Just then, some other classmates noticed us and started walking over. "Our teacher is here now. Oh, I should go say hello." Smiling brightly, like a completely different person, Emily joined the others to greet our teacher. Relieved to finally be free, I let out a small sigh. But then Emily abruptly stopped, turned back, and looked at me. "It really was good to see you again." With those cryptic words and a chillingly cold gaze, she finally turned and walked away. I stood there, watching her retreating figure, trying to make sense of her behavior. Why did she harbor such animosity toward me? No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't think of a single reason. What were you two talking about? As Emily disappeared, some classmates came over to me, replacing her presence. "What's going on between you and Miss Tokyo University? You two looked very close." They started buzzing about how Emily had been crowned Miss Tokyo University at her university, clearly captivated by the idea. The phrase "beauty and brains" seemed made for someone like Emily. Hearing about her accolades didn't surprise me in the least. But what lingered in my mind wasn't her achievements, it was her cryptic "I'm glad we could meet again" and that icy smile. While I wrestled with this uneasy feeling, the reunion carried on smoothly. After an exciting round of bingo, Emily approached me again, as if she'd suddenly remembered something. This time, we weren't completely alone, there were people nearby within earshot. She still hurled words at me, though. "Some things about you haven't changed, have they?" If she approached me in front of others, it was usually to humiliate me. I braced myself, wondering what she would do next. She held a piece of paper in her hand. "Hey, can you solve this?" She extended the paper toward me, her tone filled with challenge. "Don't make that scary face. It's just a little quiz," she said. Looking at the paper, I noticed something written in German. I swallowed the urge to say, "Here we go again." Back in middle school, Emily used to bring these kinds of challenges, college-level questions meant to stump me. When I couldn't solve them, she'd take an overbearing attitude, lording it over me. I considered ignoring her, but when I looked at Emily's face, she waved 3 more pieces of paper in front of me. "If you can solve even one of these, I'll do anything you want." "Heck, I'll even give myself to you," she said boldly. Her words carried an unspoken implication, not that you'd ever solve them. What kind of satisfaction could she possibly get from flaunting her superiority like this to someone she deemed less educated? I let out an involuntary sigh, which only made her smile more gleefully. "Looks like something fun is happening over here," someone said. Before I realized it, a small group of classmates had gathered around us. If she wanted to humiliate me, she needed an audience. The more people gathered, the harder it became for me to escape. "Is it too hard to even read?" she asked. This time, perhaps aware of the onlookers, she sounded less mocking and more genuinely curious. "This doesn't have a correct answer, does it?" I said. "You can read it?" The first paper she had given me had the question, "What is the largest organ in the human body?" written in German. The other three papers in her hand had the names heart, brain, and liver, each also written in German. If the question referred only to internal organs, the answer would be liver. However, since it simply said organ, it was a trick question. The real answer was skin. So I replied that none of the options were correct. Emily froze for a moment, her eyes wide in disbelief. She must have assumed, based on what she'd heard about my lack of formal schooling, that I wouldn't stand a chance of solving the question. "You answered instantly. Did you study German somewhere?" She must have thought it was just a lucky guess. Once again, a confident smile played on her lips as she questioned me. "Harvard," I replied. "What?" "I studied at Harvard." "You know, in the US." The room buzzed with shocked whispers. Of course, it was unexpected for someone as ordinary as me to mention a name like Harvard. I couldn't attend school because of my illness, but I passed the GED and went straight to university. "James, you graduated from Harvard?" "Wow, I've never met anyone who actually went there." The classmates who'd heard I didn't attend high school now surrounded me, marveling in disbelief. Meanwhile, Emily quietly slipped out of the circle. My unexpected academic background became the highlight of the evening, and the reunion eventually came to a close. After the closing remarks, I pushed through the crowd and called out to Emily, who was walking toward an exit opposite the main lobby. "Emily, can I have a moment? There's something I want to ask you." She stopped, her expression a mix of annoyance and resignation. We ended up alone in the passageway leading to the parking lot. "You said you'd do anything if I solved even one of those questions, didn't you?" "Did I say that?" She feigned ignorance, but I wasn't going to let this chance slip by. When she tried to walk past me, I stepped in front of her, fixing her with a serious gaze. Perhaps resigned to my determination, Emily slowly closed her eyes, then opened them again and said, "Do as you like." She stood there calmly, looking straight at me, waiting to hear what I had to say. "Why did you keep bothering me? Not just today, but back in middle school too?" Emily averted her gaze, refusing to answer. If she wasn't going to talk, then I might as well say the things I couldn't back then. With that thought, I began to speak. "Fine, I'll answer the question for you. I couldn't go to school because I got sick. We moved not just because of family circumstances, but also to help me recover. And you, Emily, were one of the reasons I got sick." Even as I said this, Emily listened with a detached, uninterested expression, as if my words were someone else's story entirely. Her indifference irritated me, bringing back vivid memories of the torment I endured in middle school. Did she truly not remember what she had done? She was the daughter of a well-known corporate giant, consistently topping her class in academics. She excelled in sports, winning championships in club tournaments. Her beauty was so striking that male students from other schools came to see her, and even scouts approached her. With perfection in every aspect, she was incredibly popular at school. Teachers trusted her, classmates admired her, and even upperclassmen and underclassmen were drawn to her charm. She was the center of attention in class and extracurriculars, and everyone wanted to work with her on committees or group projects. She received love confessions so frequently that it became a common sight for us classmates. But one day, during one of the moments she cornered me in an empty classroom, an upperclassman saw us from a distant window. To him, It must have looked like we were chatting alone in an empty room. In reality, she was berating me with insults. That upperclassman had recently been rejected by Emily, and seeing us together sparked his jealousy. That's when his harassment of me began. Until he graduated, I endured bullying from him while also dealing with Emily's constant taunts. By the end of my first year of middle school, I was skipping classes more and more. Not everything was your fault, I continued, but thanks to you, my middle school years were filled with pain. Eventually, the stress affected not only my mental health but also my physical health. You, who had everything, might have seen it as nothing more than a way to pass the time. But have you ever stopped to think about how your actions could affect someone else's life? Affect someone's life? You're so dramatic. Emily responded with a laugh that was more like defiance. Don't you even know what your family did? If we're talking about ruining lives, you shouldn't have existed in the first place. What are you talking about? Why do you hate me so much? Why wouldn't I? Do you even know what your father did? Her sudden mention of my father left me speechless. What does my father have to do with this? Listen carefully, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Your father stole my mother away from me. Her words left me stunned, my mind blank. He seduced my naive mother, convinced her to divorce my father, and then married her. Your family destroyed mine. You must be joking. I can't believe it. My parents have always had a good relationship. Even when the factory struggled, they supported each other and raised me and my brother together. My stepmother, who wasn't related to me by blood, treated me and my brother equally, raising us with kindness. For someone like me, who barely remembered my biological mother, my stepmother was the only mother I truly knew. I cried myself to sleep every night after my mother abandoned me. Then one day, I saw them, your filthy father and my mother, laughing together in some shabby diner. So that was it. My father's second wife, my stepmother, was Emily's mother. To her, my father was the hated man who had stolen her mother. And to her, I was the detested child who had received the love that should have been hers. It was then that I finally understood it wasn't just me, she hated my entire family. All the torment she had inflicted on me was her form of revenge. I even went to that ordinary public middle school just to torment you. I thought I wouldn't get the chance to finish my revenge when you moved. But those words from Emily at the reunion, "I'm glad I got to see you again," comes to mind. Was that her way of saying, I'm glad I can continue my revenge? I thought you'd been living peacefully in the countryside, but to hear you got sick and couldn't even attend school. Serves you right. You can't just run away and expect to live happily ever after. Emily sneered, her voice full of satisfaction. Then she turned on her heel and walked away. I decided not to head straight back to my apartment that night but instead stopped by my parents' house. I needed to hear the truth from them about what Emily had said. Since my brother was out, I recounted everything I had learned from Emily directly to my parents. After listening, they hesitated but eventually told me everything. My mother had divorced Emily's father and married my father. It was true. However, the story my mother told was different from what Emily had claimed. If Emily continued to believe her version of the events, her resentment would never be resolved, even with all the revenge in the world. I realized I had to tell her the truth. I wasn't sure if she would be willing to listen, but I decided to meet her again. Not knowing her contact information, I reached out to one of our classmates from the reunion, who helped arrange a meeting. I waited for Emily at a cafe we had agreed on. She arrived precisely on time, sitting down across from me with a curious but wary expression. What do you want? I'm busy, she said curtly. It's about what you told me the other day, I began. As I spoke, she flipped through the menu with disinterest. My mother. The moment I said the word mother, Emily glared sharply at me, her eyes full of contempt. That glare alone was enough to say, she's not your mother. I realized then how deeply she resented me for having the mother she believed was taken from her. Quickly, I corrected myself and referred to my mother by name. Anna married my father because your father kicked her out of the house. What a convenient lie. Do you expect me to believe that? It's what Anna herself told me, I said firmly. For a moment, Emily faltered, her confidence shaken. She stayed silent. I continued, explaining everything I had learned. Your father wanted a male heir. After they married, Anna discovered she had difficulty conceiving. She underwent fertility treatments. And when she finally became pregnant, the baby turned out to be a girl. Emily was that child. Knowing that her birth was not something her father had wished for would hurt her even more. However, I decided to recount the facts as calmly and plainly as I could. Because the long-awaited child turned out to be a girl, your father became furious and drove your mother out. He never truly loved Anna. So he had no hesitation in unfairly casting her aside. The only reason he kept you with him was, for the sake of saving face. Stop it. You think I didn't already know that? Emily shot to her feet, her fists clenched tightly, trembling with anger. Her hands shook with suppressed fury. But I pressed on. Afterward, Anna was left broken emotionally and physically. That's when she met my father, and they got married. Eventually, they had a son together. Hearing this, Emily looked utterly stunned, shaking her head in disbelief. That's a lie. Grabbing her handbag with a sense of urgency, she dashed out of the store. From behind, she looked different than usual. She had always been the confident, poised girl from a wealthy, accomplished family, naturally at the center of every social circle. But for the first time, I saw her as just another person, like me. Perhaps it had been my own bias, and that of those around me, that imposed the idea of her being from a different world or unrelated to someone like me. Emily, who always seemed fortunate and free of worries, had probably faced her own struggles and pain, just like I had. If, back in middle school, I hadn't kept my distance from her as if she were someone special and had treated her as just a regular girl, maybe I would have understood her feelings earlier. Maybe things could have turned out differently. But what's done is done. It's too late now. A few days later, to my surprise, Emily asked to meet me. She suggested the same cafe where we had met before. Arriving a little early, I found that Emily was already there, waiting. Noticing me, she stood up and bowed deeply. Startled, I glanced around. The cafe was nearly empty, but the staff were watching us, curious about the scene. What's going on all of a sudden? I've truly been awful. I'm so sorry. Still bowing, Emily spoke her apology clearly. Wait, first, raise your head and have a seat, I said, gesturing for her to sit. Emily straightened up and sat down across from me. After our last conversation, I decided to look into the truth myself. I asked our former housekeeper, the driver, and even my father about it. And you were right. My mother was cast out because she couldn't bear an heir. They said there was no need for a wife who couldn't produce a successor. I see. They only kept me around for appearances. If I hadn't been accomplished in both academics and sports, they were ready to send me to live with another family. To my father, both a wife and children are only valuable if they serve a purpose. That's unbelievable. He's your father. You're his daughter. To him, I'm a decoration, a beauty with brains to promote his image. If he ever remarries and doesn't have an heir, he plans to marry me off to an accomplished man to secure the family legacy. I felt a surge of anger, surpassing my shock. What kind of person treats family like that? Learning the truth about my father made it easy to decide. I'm leaving home. I've quit my job at his company and decided to live on my own. That's why I wanted to meet you before disappearing from your life. I needed to apologize properly. Emily looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. After finishing her story, she bowed once more and began to leave. Wait a second. If you really feel sorry, then help me out with something. I was shocked by my own words, asking for help from someone who had harassed me so much in the past. On top of that, I had practically threatened her with, if you really feel bad about it. That's how much I couldn't just leave Emily as she was now. Emily, hearing my proposal, looked even more astonished than I felt. My brother and I are working at a startup he founded, but we're short-staffed for a new project. We need someone who's skilled with languages. Would you consider working with us? Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. Even I wasn't sure I could fully forgive her for what she'd done. But she was also a victim. She had lost her mother and been manipulated by her father without ever realizing his true nature. I can't promise I'll forgive you right away. But kids don't get to choose their parents. I can't hold you entirely responsible for everything. Besides, you still owe me a favor from that quiz game, right? No one could truly understand Emily's struggles except for her. But it was clear she had faced pain and hardship. And most likely, no one had ever truly acknowledged it. Without saying a word, she broke down into tears right then and there. My words seemed to have reached her, and eventually, she agreed to work with us at my brother's company. We arranged for a formal interview with my brother, who was also the CEO, though it was more of a formality. When the day came, Emily arrived at the office looking visibly nervous. In stark contrast, my brother had been excited for days at the prospect of meeting her. "Excuse me." The moment Emily stepped into the conference room where we were waiting, my brother rushed over, grabbed her hand, and gave her a firm handshake. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. I'm Lucas, James's younger brother. It's a pleasure to have you on board." Emily was initially bewildered by the sudden warm welcome, but her nervous expression soon softened into a relaxed smile. I'm happy to have a younger brother too," she said. Watching how quickly the two of them bonded, I couldn't help but feel a little envious. Although Emily didn't know much about farming, her exceptional skills in overseas negotiations and procurement were immediately apparent. As expected from a Stanford University graduate, their quick thinking and fluency in languages are truly impressive. Thanks to her efforts, our expansion into new markets went smoothly, and the company's performance skyrocketed. Meanwhile, her father's company began to decline. According to people in the industry, Emily's departure was the main reason. As the daughter of the CEO, Emily had been entrusted with significant authority, coordinating various departments and ensuring smooth operations. Without her, the company's chain of command fell apart, and internal factions began to split, leading to near collapse. The father, who had only ever desired a male heir, never bothered to acknowledge his daughter's capabilities. Now, desperate to bring her back, he realized far too late that it was Emily who had been holding the company together. Emily, however, blocked all contact from him and refused to engage. If only her father had treated her with respect and acknowledged her as his daughter, he might have recognized her abilities much earlier. Since Emily started working with us, my mother had been asking about her more and more. I could tell my mother wanted to meet her. Though I'd planned to introduce them someday, the opportunity came sooner than I expected. Our company hosts an annual barbecue event where employees can bring their families. My brother and I decided to bring our mother along, and there, we introduced her to Emily. Sensing the need to give them some privacy, we stepped aside, though we couldn't resist sneaking a glance at them. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but the two of them embraced, tears streaming down their faces as they celebrated their reunion. Looking closely, it was clear they were mother and daughter. Even their tearful expressions were strikingly similar. After that day, Emily began visiting our family home from time to time. To my mother and brother, she was undeniably family, and even my father adored her. Now, she is experiencing what it feels like to be truly loved by a family. There was a time when we resented each other, knowing so little about one another. But seeing Emily happy with my family, I'm grateful we were able to express our feelings, reconcile, and find a way to move forward together. And now, Emily is carrying new life within her. The girl who once lost faith in family is now creating one of her own. Papa, danke schön. This time, her words in German bring a sense of happiness. But that's a story for another day. If you can solve this problem, I'll give myself to you. I'll do whatever you ask. At the middle school reunion, the former winner of Tokyo University's beauty contest and daughter of a company president hit us with a tricky, mean-spirited question. For some reason, she had always seemed to dislike me, and now, she was smirking and ridiculing me, mocking the fact that I had only finished middle school. Her expression clearly said, "There's no way you'll solve this." But I am. Sorry, it was too easy, so I already solved it. What? Actually, I am. The company president's daughter froze upon hearing the truth about me. Now then, what shall I make her do? My name is Matthew. Due to work, I returned to my hometown for the first time in 15 years. Although I grew up here until middle school, I didn't have many fond memories of this town. After moving away in my third year of middle school, I made an effort to keep my distance from this place. I lost touch with my old classmates and skipped both the coming-of-age ceremony and reunions. If it weren't for work, I would never have set foot in this place in my entire life. After 15 years, I assumed no one would recognize me even if I passed an old classmate on the street, and I certainly wouldn't recognize them. I didn't plan on revealing anything about myself, so I was just going to finish my work and leave quickly. As I stepped off the train at the familiar station, I felt an odd sense of disconnection from the quiet scene before me. It was hard to believe this was the same town I once knew. Since I had time before my hotel check-in, I stored my carry-on suitcase in a locker and decided to take a walk around. I didn't leave this place out of some dramatic rejection. Even though having no real attachment to it anymore, I felt a pang of sadness knowing what it once was. I guess even I have a bit of nostalgia left in me. Muttering to myself, I began retracing my steps through the places of my childhood where my home once stood, the kindergarten I attended, and the elementary school I graduated from. The kindergarten had been replaced with a new, cleaner building. To the right, where a shop once stood, the lot had been absorbed into the kindergarten grounds. I used to be close with the shop owner's grandson. Whenever my mother was late picking me up, I'd wait in their shop. To the left, the lot was now empty. I couldn't even remember what used to be there. I continued on to the elementary school. The school I attended for 6 years had partially been converted into a community center. With a shrinking population, it must have been shut down. I decided not to visit my middle school and headed back to the station instead. By now, it was just about time to check into my hotel. Retrieving my carry-on suitcase from the locker, I checked the bus schedule. It was 3 stops away by bus or about a 15-minute walk. The last bus had left just 5 minutes earlier, and with only 3 buses per hour, the timing was awkward. I was about to walk when a taxi conveniently pulled into the station's traffic circle. Flagging it down, I gave the driver the hotel's name. The ride lasted only 5 minutes, and the driver didn't attempt to make small talk. I handed him a $10 bill and told him to keep the change. He kindly took my carry-on suitcase out of the trunk for me. There was only one hotel in this town, and I knew people from my business partners were also staying there. Not wanting to run into anyone before tomorrow's meeting, I decided to stay in my room until then. My room was on the 8th floor. Once inside, I placed the convenience store-bought meal and bread on the table and pulled back the curtains. Bathed in the evening sunlight, I could see the middle school I had avoided visiting earlier. The moment I caught sight of the unchanged building, I could almost hear a classmate's voice, "Stay out of my sight, you're irritating." Hannah Anderson transferred into my class during the 3rd semester of our first year of middle school. The moment she stepped into the classroom, everyone held their breath. She was stunning. She wasn't just beautiful, but her grades were top-notch. She was the definition of beauty and brains. She stood out wherever she went, and even high school boys from the neighboring town came daily just to catch a glimpse of her. She became the student council president and was someone even the teachers held in high regard. Perhaps because of her role as student council president, she treated those around her with kindness and quickly became the most popular student in the school. Everyone, that is except for me. For reasons I never understood, Hannah seemed to have it out for me. She harassed me when no one was watching, making sure her actions would go unnoticed. I didn't know how to handle her, so I spent most of my time trying to avoid her. When I was with my friends, she never did anything overt. But things like only my handouts being mysteriously blank or her accidentally dropping test sheets and revealing my scores to the entire class happened often. Each time, she would tearfully apologize in front of everyone, and I had no choice but to accept it. Everyone, including classmates, teachers, and even my closest friends, was on Hannah's side. No one believed me when I tried to explain what was happening. I wasn't isolated at school. I had friends, my grades were above average, and I did decently well in club activities. From the outside, my middle school life seemed perfectly normal. And yet, since Hannah's arrival, I had always felt a sense of loneliness. I also wanted to do something about the situation, so I once asked Hannah why she was only picking on me. She just laughed and said, "Don't flatter yourself," before walking away. Man, I'm remembering some unpleasant things. I threw myself onto the single bed. I endured being in the same class as her during my second year of middle school. But when I found out we were placed in the same class again for my third year, I started skipping school more often. Fortunately for me, shortly after that, my family had to move. I told no one, neither Hannah nor my classmates, and left without saying a word. The next day, I was busy with site inspections and meetings with the client. We had agreed to meet in the hotel lobby beforehand. There was a man accompanying the usual representative from the other company who always takes care of us. Since we were meeting for the first time, we exchanged business cards. When he looked at my card, the man suddenly raised his voice and said, "Matthew, is that you? Excuse me, where might we have met before?" The moment I heard his voice, I knew exactly who he was. But I deliberately pretended not to remember and asked him, "It's me, Kevin. We were in the same class in middle school. You just transferred without telling anyone." Everyone was so sad afterward. Were you trying to be dramatic? Like, I'm so cool that I disappeared without a word. Kevin looked genuinely overjoyed to see me again. He started reminiscing with an innocent smile. I thought we were close friends, man. I was really sad when you left. Looking back, though, you were kind of cold. Sorry. Kevin threw his arm around my shoulder, but the usual representative chided him, saying, "This is a business setting." Kevin quickly pulled away from me, looking flustered. I had considered the possibility of running into someone familiar. But since our clients were based outside this town, and I was only here for a land acquisition project, even if I passed someone I knew, I thought I could simply ignore them. I never expected someone to recognize me outright. "So, you're not living here either?" "Nah, I moved away for college and ended up working elsewhere. But when I heard about a project in my hometown, I volunteered for it." I see. We wrapped up the meeting and finished inspecting the site. Since only final adjustments remained, it didn't take as much time as I had expected. "Hey, since we haven't seen each other in so long, how about grabbing a drink?" "Yeah, why not?" Talking with Kevin brought back a wave of fun memories from middle school. If not for Hannah, my middle school life might have been genuinely enjoyable. Want me to call a few others from that time? I'd prefer to keep it small. You know, otherwise, people will start asking all sorts of questions. Kevin suggested inviting other classmates, but I politely declined. Of course, Kevin didn't push me. Instead, he took me to a familiar bar he often stops by when he's back in town. Fueled by the alcohol, our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself unexpectedly enjoying the evening. Memories of my time at elementary and middle school came back in vivid color. Thankfully, Hannah's name never came up. By the way, our middle school is having a 50th anniversary celebration soon. The organizers wanted to invite you but couldn't track down your contact info. A 50th anniversary celebration? Yeah, it's basically a big reunion with dinner at a nice hotel. You should come. At first, I was ready to refuse outright. The RSVP deadline is next week, so just let me know. Kevin added quickly, as if sensing my hesitation. We exchanged contact information through a messaging app before leaving the bar. Before I knew it, midnight was approaching. It amazed me how much there was to talk about. Kevin was staying at his parents' house, so we parted ways, and I headed straight back to the hotel. I returned to the hotel and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in a while, I could honestly think to myself, today was fun. At the same time, seeing Kevin made me wonder, can I really keep running away like this? Was it worth letting memories of Hannah hold me back and missing out on opportunities like this? Will Hannah be at the celebration? If she wasn't, all the better, I could enjoy myself without any trouble. But what if I see her? I wasn't the same person I was back then. I was an adult now with years of experience behind me. I no longer felt like I would lose if I faced Hannah now, and if her presence had become such a monumental trauma for me. Wasn't this my chance to overcome it? Using the messaging app one had just installed, I sent a message to Kevin, telling him I would attend. When I arrived at the hotel, I ran into Kevin by chance in the lobby. The event hadn't started yet, but the spacious hall was already alive with cheers and laughter from every direction. Weaving through people reconnecting and sharing nostalgic reunions, I searched for the table matching the name card handed to me at the reception. At the round table, a few of my former classmates, all dressed up, were already seated. As soon as they saw me, they stood up. Matthew. Is that really you? It's been forever. I must have seemed quite the rarity because, before I knew it, I was surrounded by my former classmates. You're alive after all. Of course I am. You disappeared so suddenly, so we were all worried about you. Well, I'm glad you guys even remember me. Seeing their faces took me right back to middle school. The way they spoke and acted felt like nothing had changed since then. Some were now sharp-looking company presidents in pressed suits, while others, dressed elegantly, were balancing careers and raising kids. Yet here, they all seemed to slip back into their younger selves. As I enjoyed being in that pleasant circle, a different kind of murmur, unlike the earlier cheers, came from the entrance. Everyone turned their heads in that direction. Wow, she's stunning. She stood tall and elegant with a mature face adorned by makeup fit for an actress, wearing a designer dress. The way she walked made the place feel like the runway of a high-end fashion show. Hannah. I looked away from her, who had drawn so much attention. Hannah, you look like a model or an actress. Well, I just walked on a real runway the other day. I guess I haven't broken the habit yet. As expected. A former winner of Tokyo University's beauty contest like you lives in a completely different world from us commoners. That was already 10 years ago. Hannah replied jokingly, chatting as she walked by different groups. Her figure truly resembled a Hollywood actress on a red carpet. Not wanting her to notice I had been mesmerized, I called out to a server passing by with a tray of drinks. Instead of champagne meant for toasts, I grabbed a beer to wet my throat. It's been a while. Hannah stopped just behind me and spoke. Yeah, it has. I answered without turning toward her. You've been hiding all this time, so what brings you here now? Hannah leaned in close to my right ear and whispered in a voice only I could hear. I caught the pleasant scent of her cologne. Do I need to tell you? Of course. I'm curious. Why did you skip school in middle school? Why did you suddenly move away, like someone running from the night? Hannah spoke with a twisted smirk, her voice audible only to me. With Hannah drawing attention simply by her presence, every little move she makes seems to captivate those around us. As a result, all eyes are on us. It's none of your business, and I don't feel like talking about it. Ha, you really don't like me, do you? Saying that, Hannah headed towards a table a little farther away. What a shame we're not at the same table. The room buzzed, but I pretended not to hear and sipped my beer. To dry my sweaty palms, I shook them under the tablecloth, and that's when Kevin came over. When did you get so friendly with Hannah? As if someone like her lives in a completely different world. I'd rather avoid getting involved with her. Don't be so picky. The guys here will envy you just for talking to her. That's the last thing I need. Even as the ceremony began, I couldn't shake the frustration from how Hannah hadn't changed since middle school. I had thought naively, perhaps that maybe she'd grown up and would offer some kind of apology. I didn't expect that much, but I figured we could ignore each other like adults, and that would be fine. I just wanted to be left alone. And yet, she approached me with the same attitude as back then. Far from showing any remorse, she wouldn't even leave me alone. The ceremony proceeded, and after the speeches from the guests, dinner and mingling time began. While everyone else got up to visit other tables, Hannah remained seated, entertaining the people who approached her. When I realized she wasn't going to leave her seat, I stood up and decided to make my way around the other tables. At that moment, Hannah stood and walked toward me. Hey Matthew, you were good at math, right? Caught off guard, I looked at her. What was she trying to say? Remember when I was a class rep and I carried everyone's test papers back to the classroom? That time, I accidentally dropped yours. Now that she mentioned it, I did remember. It hadn't been an accident. She had clearly done it on purpose, putting my test on display for everyone. Did something like that happen? You remember that well, don't you, Hannah? Because Matthew's answers back then were so unforgettable. She said, laughing quietly to herself. That was the worst score I'd ever gotten. And she had shown it to the entire class. There was no point in making excuses about it now. I'd been bothered because I can't seem to remember this. What was the third term when a(n plus 1 is equal to 2a(n plus 1 and the first term is a1 equals 3? Hannah suddenly brought up something completely irrelevant to the moment. She had always done this, trying to one-up me. Back in middle school, Hannah had a tutor and was already studying high school level material. She used to mock me like this all the time. Why are you asking me? Oh, don't tell me you can't answer such a simple question. Then she added quietly, just so I could hear. Of course, a middle school graduate wouldn't know. I sighed. Just when I had been starting to enjoy myself, Hannah once again ruined my mood, just like in middle school. Why don't you ask someone else? There's nothing in it for me to answer. This was supposed to be a joyful celebration. I tried to avoid causing a scene and move away, but she relentlessly followed me. Nothing in it for you? If you get it right, I'll do whatever you want. I might even marry you. Her words caused a stir around us. This was how Hannah always found herself at the center of attention. The answer is 15. And I'll pass on the marriage. Without bothering to check her reaction, I returned to my seat. The commotion around her didn't concern me. The strange tension lingered as the ceremony finally came to a close. That was insane. How did you answer so quickly? I didn't even know if it was right. When I mentioned that to the math teacher, he said it was Stanford University level and couldn't believe it. My classmates crowded around me. Don't exaggerate. Real Stanford students are far smarter. Besides, I didn't even get into high school. I just studied on my own. Took the entrance exams and somehow made it into Stanford, but I had to work like hell to keep up. What? You actually went to Stanford? As I left the venue with my classmates, we found Hannah waiting in the lobby. She bit her lip in frustration, glaring at me. Go on ahead. I need to talk to Hannah for a moment. Having said that, I stopped right in front of Hannah. I thought you'd run off again. I've been hoping I'd never have to see you again for the rest of my life. You really hate me, don't you? I was reminded of my painful middle school days because of Hannah. The stress caused me to develop alopecia and take stomach medication every day, which eventually led to me skipping school entirely. Even after moving away, I couldn't attend high school. Since my family wasn't well off, I had no choice but to help with my parents' work while studying on my own. Do you have any idea how your actions impacted someone's life? When I said that, Hannah laughed, a cold and entertained laugh. Do you have no heart? I couldn't help raising my voice at her callousness. So what? If you want to talk about impact, do you know how your father ruined my life? Her hateful glare made me catch my breath. Hannah glared at me and said, "My mother was taken away by your father." Then, seeing the look of shock on my face, she laughed again as if she found it amusing. It was true. I wasn't biologically related to my mother. My real mother passed away when I was young, and the one who raised me was my father's second wife. Of course, I had no idea she was Hannah's mother. You stole my mother from me, so it's only natural I hate you. You can't possibly understand what it feels like to be abandoned by own mother. Can you? To see the woman who left you holding hands with some unknown child and being called mom? Don't act like you have the right to lecture me about understanding other people's feelings. I couldn't say a word back. My head was spinning, trying to process everything. I transferred to the same middle school just to get revenge on you. I even made sure to be placed in your class. With my father's name, it was easy to get close to you. Hannah had always been dropped off and picked up by a private chauffeur. She was the daughter of a prominent family from the next town and the president's daughter of a major company. Back then, there were plenty of rumors about why she had suddenly transferred schools. I never would have guessed that her reason had been revenge on me. It seems there's a deeper connection between us than I ever realized. I heard Hannah call out to me, but I walked straight out of the entrance and got into the taxi waiting outside. My parents had run a small diner that had been passed down from my grandfather. After my mother passed away, my grandmother sometimes helped out, but I still remember how busy my father always seemed, running the place alone. Right before I started elementary school, my father hired a part-time worker. That woman eventually became his second wife, and she was also Hannah's mother. The two of them had a daughter, giving me a little sister. We helped each other as a family, with me assisting in the store and taking care of my sister. Thanks to my new mother and sister, I came to realize that such a life could be truly fulfilling. But when I was in middle school, redevelopment plans forced us to relocate. My father, as the representative of the shopping district, led the negotiations, and I remember how exhausted he looked every day. The developers promised that the relocated shops would be given priority in the new mall, but construction was delayed indefinitely, leaving the shop owners stranded. My father said, "Let's take this opportunity to move and start fresh," and he quickly found us a new place to live. He thought a change of environment might also help me with my school refusal. As a result, we were the first to leave town. The company leading the redevelopment was Hannah's father's company. My stepmother was always kind, treating me and my sister equally. She never indulged in luxury or selfish desires, always putting the family first. So she was far from the image of the former wife of a major company president. It was hard to believe that such a loving woman had left a child behind to choose another life. Instead of returning to my apartment that night, I headed straight to my parents' home. "Welcome back. Have you eaten yet?" My mother greeted me with a smile, her first concern being whether I'd had dinner. I hadn't. I had come straight home after turning down an invitation to go drinking. "Let's wait for your father and eat together, then. Before dinner, there's something I need to ask you." I carefully chose my words as I shared what Hannah had told me. The next day, I asked Kevin to contact Hannah, and we arranged to meet. Is this about the marriage proposal? Changed your mind after all? Kevin teased. I brushed him off. When I arrived at the designated cafe, Hannah wasn't there yet. I took a seat and ordered a coffee. After a while, Hannah showed up with a sullen expression on her face. Why did you call me here? Don't tell me you're going to grovel on behalf of your father. Ignoring her usual provocation, I relayed what I had heard from my parents. First, your father took a liking to my mother and married her despite opposition from everyone who said she's not of the proper status or she's unfit for the Anderson family. After the wedding, when my mother was treated coldly by the relatives and tormented by her mother-in-law, your father didn't lift a finger to help. On the contrary, he grew tired of her and started having affairs with other women. It was around that time that she found out she was pregnant, and you were born. But when the baby turned out to be a girl, your grandmother flew into a rage and said, "A useless woman who can't produce an heir has no place here." She kicked my mother out, leaving her with nowhere to go. It was then that my father's shop happened to be looking for live-in help, so she began working there. That was the beginning of their relationship and eventually led to their marriage. This is what my mother told me. If you say you can't believe it, that's fine, but I believe her. If she was kicked out, as a mother, she would have taken me with her. There's no way she would have abandoned her child so easily. My mother said that if no heir was born, they might eventually consider adopting one. Plus, you were a beautiful baby. So your grandmother believed you could be married off to a suitable family in the future. That's why your grandmother didn't let you go. I expected Hannah to deny it strongly and to insist it was impossible, but even she seemed stunned by what I had said. Maybe something about it rang true to her. Suddenly, Hannah, who had been looking down, started laughing. Ha ha. That story is probably true. It all adds up, doesn't it? My grandmother was always bad-mouthing my mother, saying she seduced my father. That she was useless for not producing an heir, that she was good for nothing. She would always tell me not to end up like her. My father, on the other hand, was always out with other women and rarely came home. No matter what I did, he just ignored me. Though he never failed to provide money. As long as I had good grades and looked beautiful, I could get away with anything. And yet, both of them would say to me, "We'll marry you off to someone from a good family. So you must be talented and beautiful." They conveniently ignored their own behavior, of course. "Hey, why don't you come meet my mom sometime?" Before I realized it, the words had slipped out. Hannah looked at me, her eyes wide in shock. The project I'm currently leading includes rebuilding the shopping mall that Hannah's father's company abandoned 15 years ago. I still remember the look on my father's face when he stood in front of the empty lot where his shop used to be. That sadness stuck with me. I wanted to rebuild my father's shop here, even though part of me wanted to forget my time in this town. So, I worked hard. I studied on my own, saved money by working part-time jobs, and, though it took longer than others, I earned a degree in business management from a top university. Now, as a consultant in high demand, I've come back to lead this redevelopment. A company had stepped in to take over the project abandoned by Hannah's father, and we've been making steady progress. After the reunion, something shifted. I no longer felt resistance to being back here. One day, while I was on site, Hannah reached out to me. I've finally sorted out my thoughts and made up my mind. I want to accept your offer. At first, I didn't understand what she meant. You know, about meeting my mother. All right, I'm already in the area today, so I'll contact you when I'm done. But the roads near my place are narrow, so with your car. There's no chauffeur anymore, so I'll walk myself. I've left home and started living on my own. I've also stepped down as an executive at my father's company. I just thought it was time for a fresh start. Hannah's words surprised me. After work, I met her at the station. She still stood out, so people couldn't help but turn and stare, but she didn't seem to care. I didn't want to make her take the train, so I hailed a taxi. Hannah was nervous. She didn't say a single word on the way. Her uncharacteristically quiet demeanor almost made me laugh, but I kept my face turned toward the window. When we arrived, my family was waiting. When I welcomed the visibly nervous Hannah, my sister's eyes lit up with excitement as she exclaimed, "I can't believe such a beautiful person is my blood-related big sister." For once, Hannah looked flustered, a shy expression crossing her face. I was stunned because she was rarely embarrassed. "It's a small place, but please come in." My sister took Hannah by the hand and led her to the back. My mother had worked hard to prepare a feast, waiting for Hannah with plenty of dishes. "Mom!" The moment Hannah saw her, she broke down, sobbing on the spot. From that day on, Hannah started visiting our home more often. She got along well with my sister. They went shopping together, visited cafes, and spent time like real siblings. Even my father, still somewhat reserved, began helping her with career advice. "Hey, if you're still looking for work, why not help with my project?" "I can't. I did terrible things to you. I don't deserve that." Hannah was clearly holding on to guilt. With everyone else in my family, she was fine, but when it came to me, there was still a wall. "You said at the reunion that if I got the answer right, you would do anything, remember?" I genuinely needed the extra help, and with Hannah's background as a Tokyo University graduate, her credentials were truly impeccable. Still, I couldn't resist teasing her. Fine. 3 years later, the redevelopment project was a success. The shopping mall exceeded its expected foot traffic and became a bustling hub of activity. My father's shop was reborn, transformed with my sister's creative ideas into a stylish diner that became a hit on social media. Seeing the three of them, my father, stepmother, and sister, happily running the place together, I finally felt my dream had come true. I'm still thriving as a consultant for major corporations. These days, I'm so busy that I even have to turn down new clients. Hannah became an indispensable partner in my work, supporting me far beyond my expectations. "Hey, don't you think we're practically family already? What are you talking about? Are you working so hard you finally lost it? Maybe you need a break." Amused yet still concerned, Hannah listened as I asked, "At that ceremony, I said I'd decline the marriage, but can I take that back?" Her face turned bright red, all the way to her ears. Is this what they call fate? The word fate made my heart skip a beat. Grace chuckled softly. Maybe it's odd to hear that from a tall woman like me. With that, she stood up gracefully and walked away. If you were my destined partner, nothing would make me happier. I found myself staring blankly at Grace as she elegantly adjusted her kimono. My name is Henry, and I'm 30 years old. I work at a traditional hot spring inn that's been in operation for 130 years. Am I a housekeeper? Cleaning, front desk, guest services, serving meals. I handle everything except cooking. Since I'm the youngest on the team, I often get tasked with physical labor and other odd jobs. Today's guests, just 2 groups, huh? I glanced at the guest ledger at the front desk, about to sigh, when I heard a melancholic voice behind me. Just 2 groups today, huh? I turned around to see a beautiful woman in a kimono standing there. It was Grace, the young proprietress of this inn. She had captivating eyes and slightly full lips right in the center of my preferences. But at 173 centimeters tall, she towered over my 165 centimeters frame, and she was 3 years older than me. It was hard to imagine I was even on her radar as a romantic prospect. At this rate, we'll go under. I wonder if there's a way out of this. I glanced out the window. Though it was some distance away, its sheer presence was overwhelming. That massive resort hotel had thrown our traditional inn into tough times ever since it opened. The grandiose building had abruptly appeared in the middle of this charming old hot spring town, drawing people away. Visitors bypassed our inn entirely, heading straight for the resort, drawn by its luxury. The other inns in the area, sensing the threat, had renovated or expanded to retain their guests. However, our inn missed that wave of change. Or rather, we intentionally chose not to follow it. This inn, built 130 years ago, stood exactly as it had since its founding. The house has been carefully preserved without any alterations and has survived the ravages of war. I prefer not to make any changes to this beautifully preserved historic home. The proprietress, Sophia, and her husband, Tyler, were adamant about keeping it that way. Of course, it wasn't just stubbornness. Even I felt it would be a shame to change anything about this place. The large wooden beams that had aged beautifully over 130 years, the polished black pillars exuding dignity, the warm yet functional plaster walls that naturally regulated humidity. My favorite feature was the lobby ceiling. The thick pine logs used as beams were breathtaking. However, it wasn't without its flaws. That's why winters are cold, and bugs sometimes sneak in through small gaps. We've been fixing cracks and doing minor repairs, but old houses are naturally drafty and cold. No matter how much we try to address it, it's never enough. For me, though, soaking in a hot spring amidst such conditions adds to the charm. It's the best. Still, I can't argue with reviews saying it's too old and cold. I wish people could see this old world charm as a benefit. Grace's melancholic expression stirred a strong desire in me to help somehow. Then, an idea suddenly popped into my head. How about kimonos? Grace blinked, surprised. Kimonos? I nodded. My grandmother left me a large collection of kimonos. You know how some places let guests choose their favorite yukata? What if we did something similar but lent out kimonos? That could help us stand out. This little hot spring town already has a nostalgic atmosphere. I've always thought it would be beautiful to see couples strolling around in kimonos. Kimonos would also look stunning inside this inn. Grace's eyes widened. That sounds wonderful. Her face lit up, and I felt my cheeks heat up a little. Oh, but those kimonos are precious keepsakes from your grandmother. Are you sure? As her glowing expression clouded with concern, I forced a reassuring smile. Of course. Actually, I've been airing them out at my parents' house regularly, and honestly, it's a lot of work. If they could be put to good use, I'd be relieved. And I think my grandmother would be thrilled too. My grandmother had adored kimonos. She came from a wealthy family and had received a number of kimonos as her wedding gifts. Even after marrying my grandfather, she saved up her allowance to buy more little by little. Friends who knew of her love for kimonos would often pass along ones they no longer needed. As a result, she ended up with a massive collection, and after her passing, we didn't know what to do with them. Selling off her beloved kimonos didn't feel right, and it's not like I could wear them myself. The kimonos had been relegated to the back of my mind, only to resurface during the seasonal airing. But seeing Grace's worried face brought them back to the forefront. After consulting with Sophia, we decided to make use of the kimonos. I and a coworker drove to my family home in a large car to pick them up. You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you? I decided to speak to my grandmother's keepsake. Somehow, they seemed to gleam a little brighter. We brought the kimonos into the large banquet hall, spread them out, and inspected them one by one. Grace let out a surprised gasp as she looked at one of them. Wait, is this? It was an elaborate formal kimono, primarily pink with a scattering of small floral patterns. Oddly, the fabric beneath the hidden ohashiri tuck was patched with a completely different material. Ah, that one might not be suitable for casual lending. The added fabric and its extravagance might make guests uneasy. Before I could finish, Grace dashed off. I stood there, dumbfounded, as she hurried back just moments later. And then, this, she exclaimed, thrusting a photo in front of me. It was a photo of a tall girl smiling in front of a small guest house, dressed in a traditional kimono. The kimono she wore is the very same formal attire I see before me now. The location in the background. My eyes widened. I went on a trip with my mother just once. Grace gazed at the photo wistfully as she shared her story. Travel was a rare luxury during her childhood, as the families in kept them busy. But once, her father Tyler had arranged for a short overnight trip for Grace and Sophia. Out of consideration for Tyler, they had chosen a simple trip, staying at a small seaside guest house and enjoying fresh seafood. That little guest house was my family's home, or to be precise, the one run by my grandparents. I lost my parents in a car accident when I was young, and since then, my grandparents had raised me in that guest house. On the front desk of the guest house, there was an amusing sign. "Would you like to try wearing a kimono?" In our little fishing town, where old, rust-stained houses stood scattered and fishing boats were moored in the harbor, kimonos seemed entirely out of place. It was a peculiar service for such a town, yet surprisingly, many people expressed interest in trying it. It wasn't a main attraction or anything fancy. It was simply a casual offer for guests who noticed the sign and asked to wear it. Many never even realized it was an option. From the many kimonos my grandmother owned, she would let guests choose one to wear. Since it was too much work to lay them all out, guests would select from photographs instead. Grace had been captivated by a sparkling formal kimono adorned with scattered floral patterns. Seeing her excitement, my grandmother narrowed her eyes in delight and tried to let her wear it. But even back then, Grace had just started middle school and already stood 170 centimeters tall. The kimono wasn't long enough. I was so disappointed that day. Grace remembered, her brows furrowing slightly as she spoke. The kimonos worn by the proprietresses of this inn were always plain and unembellished. Having only seen such simple garments, Grace had been enchanted by the dazzling formal kimono and had been eager to wear it, only to have her hopes dashed. In the end, the only kimono from my grandmother's collection that fit Grace's height was a plain blue one. And she went back to her room feeling a little sad, never getting to wear the formal kimono. Even so, the meal had been exceptionally delicious, the bath incredibly relaxing. And she thoroughly enjoyed the rare trip despite her disappointment. The next morning, as Grace and her mother Sophia were eating breakfast before checking out, my grandmother quietly sat down beside them. Then, she handed over the formal kimono. "This should work for you now." When Grace unfolded the kimono, she noticed that the central section had been patched with an entirely different fabric. "This part will be hidden under the sash," my grandmother said with a smile. "I'm not a professional seamstress, so it's not perfect. But as long as it's hidden, I hope you don't mind." My grandmother had extended the kimono so that Grace, with her tall frame, could wear it. She had cut the hidden section of fabric and stitched in an extension. Even though it was a makeshift solution, it must have taken considerable time. Yet my grandmother didn't show a hint of tiredness, instead beaming at Grace. Grace delayed their checkout to wear the formal kimono, and she took a photograph with her mother Sophia. Even now, the memory of that day warmed her heart. When Grace finished her story, I spoke up. "Now that you mention it, I once asked my grandmother why that kimono had a patch. She said it was for tall guests. I never imagined it was because of you. As a little boy freely wandering around the inn, I might have even met Grace back then. But I had no memory of her. At that time, I would have been in the 4th grade. A mischievous boy playing along the shoreline every day. Speaking of which, that day, your grandmother gave me a small seashell, saying, 'My grandson collected this.' Could that have been you?" She smiled softly, and I turned bright red. I never knew the random seashells I picked up on the beach were being given to guests. It's funny how we were connected in such unexpected ways. Still blushing, I muttered, staring down at the floor. Grace exhaled softly. "Is this what they call fate?" The word fate made my heart race, and my face grew even hotter. I couldn't bring myself to look up. Grace chuckled gently. Maybe it's odd to hear that from a tall woman like me. With that, she stood up gracefully and went to check the other kimonos. If Grace really is my destined partner, nothing could make me happier. I watched Grace gracefully handle the kimono, her movements mesmerizing, as my thoughts wandered. In the end, I did not take over my grandparents' guest house, which was a place of memories for Grace. When my grandfather passed away suddenly and my grandmother followed during my college years, I couldn't envision myself taking over the inn. Looking back now, I wonder if my decision to leave my corporate job after college and join this traditional inn was fueled, at least in part, by a lingering admiration for the hospitality industry. New services don't mean much unless people know about them. We added the kimono experience service to the inn's official website and booking platforms. We also launched official social media accounts and began promoting the service with photos. The formal kimono Grace wore, in particular, garnered a lot of attention and positive reactions. And then, a few days later, when I arrived at work, the inn was in chaos. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. One of my coworkers, phone in hand, stammered out, "Sorry, I don't know," in a mix of English and heavily accented Japanese. And I had to stifle a laugh. Spotting me, Grace looked over with a furrowed brow. "Oh, Henry. It's incredible. Thanks to the social media post, we're getting so many inquiries from international guests." But, aside from Grace and Sophia, who could manage basic English, no one else spoke any foreign languages. Even Grace and Sophia struggled when the conversations grew more complicated. On top of that, some of the languages are completely unfamiliar. "Do you know of any good translation apps?" As Grace was explaining, another call came in. I answered the phone. The language was French. I hesitated for a moment but responded in French. I could feel everyone around me holding their breath. It was an inquiry about the photos on social media. The question was whether they could wear the kimono Grace had worn, so I asked about their height and assured them it would fit. Their delighted response and promise to visit ended the call only for the phone to ring again immediately. This time, the caller was American. Switching to English, I resumed responding. It was a question about pricing, so I checked with Grace and Sophia and informed them that it would be free for the time being. The calls kept coming, in Chinese, Korean, German. When one was in Arabic, I apologized and asked if English was okay, which they graciously accepted. Posting on social media that we were working on a Q&A page and asking people to hold their inquiries helped stem the flood of calls. I posted answers to the questions I'd been asked so far, all in English for now. That day, I spent the entire time dealing with social media responses and didn't do any of my usual duties as an inn attendant. I spent the rest of the day creating a FAQ page in multiple languages, compiling answers to the most common questions we'd received. When I let out a sigh, Grace brought me a cup of tea. It was the roasted green tea served at the inn, and my favorite. I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you. It's delicious, just what I needed." As I let out a deeply relaxed sigh, Grace gave me a puzzled look and said, "The one who should be saying thank you is me. I didn't know you could speak so many languages." "That wasn't on your resume, was it?" "Henry, who exactly are you?" I scratched my head awkwardly in response. "It's nothing special." I started to tell her my story. After losing my parents in an accident, I was raised by my grandparents at their guest house. But when I was in 5th grade, my grandfather passed away suddenly. It hadn't even been a year since Grace's visit. My grandmother decided to close the guest house without hesitation. The management of the guest house was almost entirely handled by my grandfather. In particular, the fish used in the highly praised dishes were freshly caught by my grandfather himself. Something my grandmother could never have managed to procure. Though his fishing buddies offered to help, my grandmother knew she couldn't replicate his cooking and decided it was best to close the guest house. Grandfather had often joked, "If Henry wants to take over someday, he can," but as a 5th grader, I hadn't given any thought to the future. We left the building as it was, thinking that if I ever wanted to reopen it someday, it would still be an option. Though his sudden passing was heartbreaking. The life insurance from my parents' accident and my grandfather's own policy ensured we weren't left in immediate financial trouble. At that moment, my grandmother had a brilliant idea. "It's an international world now," she declared, and started hosting homestay guests in the unused rooms of our guest house. What I thought would be a quiet life with just the two of us turned into a lively, bustling home filled with foreign visitors coming and going. My grandmother would serve delicious Japanese home-cooked meals to the homestay guests, and in return, she asked them to teach me their languages. Although their stays were short, the constant rotation of visitors meant I was exposed to a variety of languages and cultures. As a teenager, I thought it was just an unnecessary hassle. With school getting harder, I couldn't understand why I had to study French or Korean when I wasn't required to. I often complained loudly about how pointless it all seemed. But my grandmother always responded with the same words: "It's an international world now." My protests fell on deaf ears. And yet, here I am now, able to help Grace in this inn. It turned out to have meaning after all, didn't it? I finished my story and took a sip of the roasted green tea. Grace's eyes went wide. "That's amazing, you learned to speak so well just from the homestay guests teaching you?" I tilted my head slightly. "Well, maybe. They all said I had a good ear for it. Every foreigner who taught me a language praised me for having a good ear. I would listen to the words they spoke, remember them, and repeat them as they were. I could remember and replicate anything I heard just once. Looking back, even in my childhood, I could memorize and sing anything, whether it was a song or something else, after hearing it just once. Since I wasn't particularly good at singing, it never occurred to me that this could be considered a special talent. That's not just a skill, it's like a superpower." Grace widened her eyes in surprise as she spoke, but I couldn't quite grasp what she meant. "I'm not so sure. I've never been confident about it." The homestay guests were all kind and always said excellent, even though my language skills were clumsy. They were just being nice, I think. Because of that, I never truly believed my words were understood. That's why I'd never claimed to speak foreign languages and likely never would. Most of the guests at this inn were Japanese, and even when foreign visitors came, Grace's English was enough to handle things. So I never really had a role to play. But Grace shook her head firmly. "If you can handle phone calls, then you're fine. For me, I can get by in English face-to-face with gestures, but phone calls are much harder. Not being able to see the other person's face, it's unnerving." She had a point. I couldn't tell from their expression whether they understood or not. Even when someone said, "Okay," it was hard to tell if they really understood. At this rate, we're going to see more foreign guests. There will probably be situations where I can't handle it alone. Grace turned to me, straightening her posture. "I'm counting on you. Don't quit, okay?" She bowed gracefully, and I panicked. "Wait, please don't. I'm not that special." At my words, Grace lifts her head. "Not that special? You're amazing. Have some confidence." Her sharp gaze flustered me even more. "Maybe I showed a little bit of a cool side today?" I muttered, scratching my head awkwardly. Grace smiled gently. "Henry, you're always cool." Her words made my face burn bright red. "You're always the first to take the lead. The senior attendants are getting older, and tasks that strain their backs or knees. You always take care of those for them. Everyone appreciates how thoughtful you are, that's what makes you so cool." I felt utterly embarrassed. I guess it's just because I grew up with my grandparents and got used to it. Grace's smile deepened. "Well, if your grandmother raised you, it's no wonder you turned out to be kind and cool. I've always admired her. She must have stayed up late to extend the kimono for me, just because I look so sad. I think she's amazing, and she's still my role model. I want to become a proprietress like her, someone who can naturally empathize with others." As she spoke, Grace opened her palm in front of me. In her hand was a small bottle filled with sand and a tiny pink seashell. This. Grace chuckled softly. I loved that little shell so much that my mom and I bought this small bottle at a souvenir shop, filled it with sand, and put the shell inside. It's been nearly 20 years, but it's still beautiful, isn't it? The shell I had picked up from the beach 20 years ago now shone brightly in Grace's hands. Looking at it, I felt as if my grandmother were cheering me on. Grace. I love you. Grace's eyes widened at my sudden confession. It's fine, I understand. I know I'm not even on your radar. I'm younger than you, shorter than you, and completely unreliable. But just like that little shell, I'd like to stay by your side. I want to be the one who supports you the most. That's why I'll never leave this inn. Grace's lips trembled. So, are you confessing to me, or rejecting me? Her words confused me, and I tilted my head. But, isn't it normal? Don't most men dislike women who are taller and older than them? Grace bit her lip tightly, and I panicked. What? Don't women dislike younger men who are shorter than them? Still looking down, Grace shook her head slowly. I don't dislike it. Tears welled up in my eyes. Is it really okay? Because I'm serious. Ever since I found out you once stayed at my grandparents' guest house, I've been thinking, what if you're truly my destined partner? Could you really choose me? Grace lifted her face. I've been thinking the same thing. But I'm tall and older, and I always thought someone small, cute, and sweet would suit someone as kind and young as you. And then I learned you could speak so many languages, you're like a superhero. Are you sure? I'm the one you want? I pulled Grace into an embrace. You're overestimating me. I'm just a guy who drank way too much milk trying to grow taller and still failed. You deserve someone taller, older, and more refined. Before I could finish, Grace smacked my back. Are you rejecting me? Her voice from within my arms made me tighten my embrace. There's no way I'd let this be a misunderstanding. Now that it's come to this, I'll never let you go. Grace whispered softly from within my hold. And I'll never give you up to some tiny, cute girl. Her words made me smile. I lifted my head slightly and kissed her on the cheek. She blushed deeply but smiled back at me. Several years later, Grace and I got married. Her parents retired, and Grace officially became the proprietress of the inn. I'm still handling a wide variety of tasks, and I don't have the dignity or presence to be called things like president, master, or boss. Even so, everyone treats me with respect. I was grateful. The kimono rental service thrived. It wasn't just foreign visitors, Japanese women also enjoyed renting kimonos to stroll around the town. When we put out a call for kimono donations to expand the variety, we received a generous response. Some of the kimonos were for children, which made them popular with families. Another hit was the option to take photos inside the inn. Guests take photos at various spots, such as with the lustrous black central pillar, or from the second floor space alongside the stately beams. The unique charm of this historic home is beautifully captured in these photos, which then circulate online, catch the eyes of new visitors, and inspire them to come. This positive cycle made both Grace and me smile. The small hot spring town embraced its identity as a town where kimonos shine, adding traditional decorations throughout. We collaborated with other inns in the area, allowing guests from any inn to rent kimonos from us at a discount. Of course, for guests staying at our inn, it remained free. We also did a bit of remodeling. To highlight the beauty of the beams for photography, we removed some walls on the second floor and added a railing and space for better views. We installed underfloor heating in the cold hallways so guests wouldn't feel chilled after a warm soak in the baths. The renovations were minimal but well received by our guests. After the outdoor bath closes, the staff take a short rest, the guests retire to their rooms or enjoy their evenings as they please. And our children drift into their dreams late at night. We set up a baby monitor in the children's bedroom, and once a week, Grace and I share a drink together. Sometimes in the lobby, sometimes in the garden, and sometimes in front of the grand central pillar. Spending time enjoying a quiet drink with Grace at our favorite spots in the inn is our irreplaceable moment of relaxation. To think there were days when this inn had no guests, it feels like a dream now. Grace smiles softly as she brings the sake cup to her lips. Her movements were so graceful, so elegant. Even after all these years, I couldn't help but be captivated. It all started with Grandma's kimono, but everything since then, it's thanks to you, Grace. We highlighted Grace, with her tall and elegant figure, in our PR efforts. She was especially well received by tall foreign women. As the hostess of the inn, Grace's gracious hospitality toward every guest who stays with us is nearly flawless. It's hard to find any faults in her conduct. Grace smiles softly and tilts her head slightly. That's thanks to Harry giving it his all to support me, isn't it? Her words warmed me deeply. I downed the sake in the small cup in one go and smile. I'll always give you my all. I held up the empty sake cup in front of Grace. She let out a soft chuckle and said, "I'm counting on you, dear," as she handed me the sake-filled cup. As she filled my cup, I let the happiness of the moment sink in. Everything we had now was built on the foundation of countless acts of kindness. It began with my grandmother's kindness toward Grace. The kindness of people from across the country who donated their kimonos to us. The kindness of guests who wore the rented kimonos with care and respect. The kindness of this town's residents, who came together to revitalize our little hot spring community. The kindness of Grace's parents, who wholeheartedly supported the kimono rental venture. And the kindness of our staff, who never abandoned the inn and gave their all to keep it alive. All these threads of kindness had been woven together, and now it was our mission to pass them down to our children and their children. From the baby monitor, we could hear the gentle sound of our children's peaceful breathing. A reminder of the love and care we were privileged to give. For now, my goal was simple, to pour boundless love into these children and nurture the kindness that they would one day pass on. I rested my head on Grace's shoulder and tilted the sake cup. A ringtone I didn't recognize went off. Her pale face grew even paler. Her trembling finger hovered over the screen. It seemed the call was from a relative. After a brief exchange, she hung up and let out a deep sigh. Could it be? No way, has her father already? My name is Michael. I'm 35 years old. I work as a truck driver for a transportation company in Niigata, Japan. I usually drive a 10-ton truck. Sometimes, I cover distances of up to 500 kilometers one way and during long, grueling hours on the road. Still, this job is perfect for someone like me who isn't great with people. After all, once the loading and unloading are done, I'm on my own. I can spend my time however I like, without worrying about anyone else. That day, I was assigned an unexpected job. It came from an old acquaintance of Mr. Taylor, the president, who lived in Maizuru, Kyoto. After completing a delivery in the city, I had to deliver materials picked up in Kanazawa to this acquaintance. The cargo wasn't big enough to require my usual 10-ton truck. But unfortunately, every other truck was out that day. So, I rented a 2-ton long truck and planned a round trip from Niigata to Kyoto via Kanazawa. The weather was downright awful. Dark clouds hung low over the plains like a lid. Strong winds shook the truck. A blizzard blanketed the roads, obscuring visibility. The storm had already paralyzed flights and train services in areas north of Tokyo and along Japan's northwest coast. Bad weather is nothing new in my line of work. But even I couldn't shake the unease caused by this storm. Heading south on the expressway, I entered Niigata, completed my first delivery, and then stopped for a break at a rest area. That's when I saw someone approaching the rental truck, waving their hand. I rolled down the window to see who it was. "Excuse me. Could you give me a ride?" It was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, shouting over the howling wind. Her long black hair was wildly tossed around by the gusts. Even in the storm, her refined features were striking. She was covered in snow, from her head to her scarf and coat, clearly having been outside for quite some time. I'm heading to Nanao, but with this weather, the planes and trains aren't running. Nanao is in Ishikawa Prefecture in Japan. It's around the middle of Japan's northwest coast. From here in Niigata, it's nearly 300 kilometers away. When I asked how she got to this rest area, she said she had been hitchhiking. Relying on strangers' cars? That's way too dangerous. Well, if you're okay with me dropping you off at a junction along the way. That's perfect. Thank you so much. I leaned over and opened the passenger door for her. She quickly brushed off the snow from her clothes before climbing in. What could drive such a young and beautiful woman to rely on complete strangers for a ride? What kind of situation could she be in? For now, I decided to help her as much as my schedule allowed. The woman introduced herself as Anna. She said she was 29 years old. She mentioned she was single and worked at a factory manufacturing mechanical parts. You've really saved me. Thank you so much. Though she had a driver's license, she admitted she hadn't driven in years. I thought about renting a car and driving myself, but I just couldn't gather the courage. It was a wise decision. After all, the weather was this terrible. No matter how urgent her situation was, I thought it was the right decision not to take any reckless risks. Still, hitchhiking all the way is impressive. What brings you to Nanao? The moment I asked, her expression darkened. Damn it! I thought to myself. It was clear she had some serious reason for her journey. As I suspected, what she told me was so heavy that I almost wanted to apologize for bringing it up. Actually, I heard my father is in critical condition. My family's home is in Nanao. And I got a call from relatives saying he was rushed to a nearby hospital. I felt my foot press harder on the accelerator without realizing it. I had picked up someone in a truly dire situation. Anna explained that her father had collapsed the previous night from a stroke. He had hit his head hard during the fall and was now unconscious. When I apologized, Anna gave a weak smile. It's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm sorry too for suddenly asking for your help like this. If I accidentally caused an accident, it would only delay Anna's arrival at the hospital. The responsibility weighed heavily on me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Anna let out a deep, heavy sigh. She regretted being such an ungrateful daughter. That's what she confessed. I was always rebelling against my parents in middle and high school. I wasn't the kind of kid who listened to them. I hated my parents, my hometown, and even myself. After graduating high school, she left her hometown after a fight with her parents and started a new life in another place, where her friends were. Since then, she had rarely contacted her parents and had often ignored calls from relatives. What about New Year's or long holidays? I didn't go back. What a waste, right? For children who leave their parents' home as adults, the time spent with family during New Year's or long holidays is incredibly precious. I once heard this on the radio while working. Depending on individual circumstances, if a parent is 65 and lives until 80, the total time a grown-up child might spend with them could amount to just about 2 weeks. Anna had wasted what little time she had. But now that I'm older, I realize how much I should have spent more time with them. I should have shown more gratitude while I had the chance. Then came the news of her father's critical condition. Of course, she was desperate to return home despite the terrible weather. Tears glistened faintly in Anna's eyes. I could clearly see how deeply she regretted everything. It wasn't just regret. I also understood how devastated she would be if she couldn't see her father before it was too late. I knew that pain all too well. I need to help her get there. I want her to make it in time. I couldn't help but think that way. At one point, we stopped at a rest area for a restroom break. While there, I received a call on my work phone. It was from the contact person at the construction materials company in Kanazawa, the destination for my delivery. They wanted to know how soon I could arrive and asked me to get there as quickly as possible. I hesitated to give an exact answer. The best option would be for Anna, heading to Nanao, and me, heading to Kanazawa, to part ways at a junction along the way. However, I didn't want to simply leave her stranded in that area. If possible, I wanted to find her another kind driver heading north on the expressway along the middle of Japan's northwest coast. I'm sorry, it's just, with this weather, yes, I think I'll be delayed. It wasn't a lie. In reality, the bad weather was causing delays. The speed limit was restricted to 50 kilometers per hour, and visibility was poor due to the blizzard. Even for someone like me, used to driving on snowy roads, it was unsettling. I'll do my best to arrive as soon as possible. I apologize for the inconvenience. That's what I said before ending the call. Anna was watching me as I put away my phone. She must have thought she was causing me trouble. That's likely what Anna was thinking. She said that it would be okay that I stop here. This is more than enough. That call earlier was from your customer, wasn't it? You're in a hurry, right? Anna said she would part ways with me here at the rest area and look for another ride. Frankly, it was reckless. I shook my head. With this weather, traffic is lighter than usual. You're not going to find another ride so easily. If you stay outside too long, you'll catch a cold. And hitchhiking is too dangerous. I can't leave you at risk like that. But I don't want to trouble you. Even just taking the highway exit to drop me off would cost you so much time. I couldn't possibly ask that. It's fine. Now, get in. Let's keep moving. Anna seemed a bit confused, perhaps because I left her no room to argue. But the one who was even more confused was me. Honestly, this wasn't something I would normally even consider. Abandoning my work halfway to help a complete stranger and heading to a place I had no reason to go? I think part of me was trying to justify it to myself. So, I decided to share the story of my own life with Anna. I wasn't on good terms with my parents either. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a small town, facing the Sea of Japan. My father was a fisherman, and my mother worked in a factory processing seafood. Anna's confession mirrored my own feelings. I hated my parents, I hated my hometown, and I hated myself. Now, those memories feel nostalgic, but back then, I couldn't stand my hometown. When my father told me to become a fisherman, I rebelled and left for Tokyo at 18 with no real purpose. After that, I drifted from one part-time job to another, just living day to day. Sometimes, when my parents called, I would lie and say, I'm too busy with work and can't take time off to visit. I still wonder why I was so determined not to go back home. One day, I got a call from my father. He said my mother had collapsed from an illness and told me to come home. But I was a stubborn, ungrateful idiot at that time, so I said it. I told him, I'm busy with work. Don't ask me for the impossible. I was 25 at the time. I remember that moment clearly. Even over the phone, I could feel my father's anger and disappointment. And, in the end, did you go back? Yes, I did. The night after that call, I was suddenly overwhelmed with regret. I couldn't not go. But, by the time I arrived, my mother was already cold. Why didn't you come sooner? My father yelled, blaming me for being such an ungrateful son. Apparently, my mother had wanted to see me right until the very end. I apologized to my father and to my cold, lifeless mother over and over. But no matter how many times I said sorry, it could never be enough. I felt pathetic. After the funeral, I found myself too ashamed to go back to my hometown, even more so than before. But I couldn't stay in Tokyo either. Somehow, I ended up in Niigata. The president of a transport company took me in, gave me work as a part-timer, and eventually offered me a full-time position. It's been about 10 years now as a driver. The car fell into a heavy silence. I realized I had shared an unpleasant and grim story, one that didn't exactly lighten the mood. But for some reason, I felt compelled to tell it. Sounds ridiculous, right? A truly ungrateful son. But that's exactly why I want you to make it in time. I want you to be able to repair your bond with your family. I want you to get another chance. It was then that I heard an unfamiliar ringtone. An unfamiliar ringtone echoed. It was Anna's phone. Her already pale face turned even whiter. Her trembling finger hovered over the screen. The caller seemed to be a relative. After a brief exchange, Anna hung up and let out a deep sigh. Could it be? No way, had her father already. I glanced at her while driving. She noticed and shook her head, giving me a faint smile. No, it wasn't that. It was my aunt from my father's side, asking where I was. I told her I'm still on my way. It seemed her father still hadn't regained consciousness. The critical situation was far from over. This car was about to reach the junction. Honestly, by that point, my mind was already made up. Adjusting my headset while driving, I called Mr. Taylor, the president of my company. Mr. Taylor, a man who had once been a truck driver himself, was known for his boldness and sense of duty. He was the one who, 10 years ago, had offered me a place when I had nowhere to go. Hello, Mr. Taylor, it's Michael. Sorry to bother you, but I have a favor to ask. It's about today's delivery. I explained how I had met Anna and shared the details of her situation. I told him I couldn't bring myself to abandon her at some halfway point. I wanted to make sure she could see her father. That's why. Please, let me drive all the way to Nanaimo. I could feel Anna gasp beside me. Mr. Taylor's answer was as clear as ever. I thanked him and ended the call. I had expected him to say something to encourage me. That's the kind of man he was, and it's why all his employees admired him. He said, "Go ahead. I'll handle the follow-up here." So, let's head straight to Nanaimo. I can't believe it. I don't even know how to thank you. What an amazing president. Yeah, that's Mr. Taylor for you. We all respect him. He's someone to look up to, no doubt. Suddenly, Anna covered her face and started to cry. She seemed overwhelmed, unable to put her emotions into words. To receive such kindness from strangers. I don't deserve this. I'm so sorry, truly. I understood why she was crying. Sometimes, when faced with selfless kindness, your heart overflows with gratitude, mixed with a sense of unworthiness. I had felt the same 10 years ago when I met Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, who gave me both a place and a job when I couldn't be there for my mother's final moments, fled from my father's cold gaze, and had nowhere else to go. Had I managed to return even a fraction of the kindness I had received back then? Regardless, there was nothing left to hesitate over now. The exit for the junction came into view. I turned the wheel to merge onto the other expressway, heading toward Nanaimo. About an hour later, guided by Anna's navigation, the truck finally arrived at the hospital. I parked near entrance of the hospital. We finally made it. Great job getting through this. Thank you so much. Here. Anna rummaged through her belongings and pulled out some cash from her wallet. Please, take this. It's probably not enough to cover gas, but I'll make sure to properly thank you another time. No. I can't accept that. I didn't bring you all this way for a reward. Convincing Anna to put the cash back in her wallet was no easy task. I'm just passing along the kindness someone once showed me. It just happened to be you this time. There's no need to feel obligated. If she wanted to thank me, I hoped Anna would pass that kindness on to someone else in need. When I said this with a smile, she nodded, her tearful eyes shimmering. Now, you'd better go inside. Just as I urged her to go, A woman emerged from the hospital entrance and noticed Anna almost at the same moment. It was likely the aunt she had mentioned on the phone. Once Anna got out, I drove away. "Wait. Please, give me your contact information," Anna called out, running after me. She didn't need to know my contact information. I never intended to accept any thanks in the first place. That's why I had tried to avoid sharing any personal details while we were in the truck. We would likely never meet again. But that was fine. In the side mirror, Anna grew smaller and smaller. Her figure, bowing deeply with her characteristic sincerity, was etched in my memory. I prayed from the bottom of my heart that Anna would safely reunite with her father. With that prayer in mind, I left Nanao behind. Of course, I didn't forget to contact Mr. Taylor. I was able to come this far thanks to Mr. Taylor's permission. I truly owe him my deepest gratitude. Working under such a strong and admirable man made me feel lucky. Determined to repay Mr. Taylor's kindness, I drove toward Kanazawa as quickly and safely as possible. Even as I continued to eventually go back to the company in Niigata, I felt at peace the entire time. Days passed, perhaps weeks. I overheard some other truck drivers talking about something interesting during a break. They mentioned a beautiful woman appearing at rest areas, asking around for someone. She would show up every weekend, looking at the windows of parked trucks and speaking to drivers. "Do you know a truck driver named Michael?" she would ask. It had to be Anna looking for me. Since the truck I was driving was a rental, she wouldn't have known my company's name. I thought there was almost no chance she would ever find me. That's what I believed. But then, a few weeks later, we somehow met again. While taking a break at a rest area as usual, I noticed someone waving at me from outside the truck, and I was surprised as I looked closer. "I found you." That familiar, radiant smile. Anna, just as beautiful as I remembered, stood before me. I stepped out of the truck and faced her properly. "Thank you so much for what you did the other day. Thanks to you, I was able to reconcile with my father. Did your father wake up?" "That's wonderful. I'm so glad." A few days after Anna visited her father in the hospital, he finally regained consciousness. He is now slowly recovering. Although some paralysis might remain, his life is no longer in danger. I truly believe in miracles now. And I think it's all thanks to you, Michael. After parting ways with me in Nanao, Anna spent weeks riding express buses on her days off, searching for me in rest areas around here, where we first met. She also posted on social media, asking for information to help find me. What incredible determination! Then again, this is the same person who hitchhiked all the way to Niigata. Eventually, we exchanged contact information. Anna, being proactive, frequently reached out to me and even visited me several times. It was Anna who expressed a desire to start dating. To hear someone as beautiful as Anna say she wanted to be with me. When she confessed her feelings, I felt like I was walking on air. One weekend, as usual, Anna came to visit my apartment. With an unusually serious expression, she told me she wanted to properly express her gratitude. "It's fine. You've already thanked me enough. You say that, but I'm not satisfied. That day in the truck, you told me about your father and what happened 10 years ago. I've been thinking about it ever since. Isn't there something I can do to help?" Since missing my mother's final moments, I had remained distant from my father in my hometown. I would answer his calls when he gave me, but I still hadn't returned home for long holidays or New Year's. In fact, I hadn't even told him I was living in Niigata. Let's go visit him together. I want to tell him how, thanks to you, I was able to reconnect with my own family. Honestly, it was an offer I deeply appreciated. Anna was trying to help me resolve an issue I had been avoiding for years. It was time for me to gather the courage to face it. And I needed to respond to her kindness as well. I decided this was the perfect moment. I handed her something I had prepared in advance. "Wait, is this? Could it be? It's an engagement ring. I've been wondering when to give it to you. Anna, will you stay by my side forever? In response to my proposal, Anna smiled through her tears and accepted my proposal. A few days after our engagement, I called home for the first time in years. My father was quite surprised to hear that I was living in Niigata. He said he never imagined I was living in the neighboring area. Dad, there's someone I want you to meet. I'm engaged. Would it be okay if I brought her to visit you? That weekend, my father made time for us, and Anna and I visited my hometown for the first time in 10 years. My father hadn't changed much from how I remembered him. His hair had more noticeable streaks of white, but that was about the only difference in his appearance. Together, Anna and I prayed in front of my mother's altar. My father spoke gently to my mother's altar. You must be surprised. I'm surprised too. Michael brought home such a beautiful bride. Anna smiled and shrugged lightly. If only my mother could be here. I couldn't help but think that. Anna then introduced herself formally and began explaining how meeting me had been a life-changing event for her. That day, if Michael hadn't picked me up, I might have given up on seeing my father. If I had, who knows if he would have ever woken up. It's thanks to him that I was able to reconnect with my father. Anna repeated this several times before finally turning to look at me. That day, Michael told me he wanted me to reconnect with my family. Now it's my turn. That's why I came here today. Encouraged by her words, I turned to face my father. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't meet his eyes. Anna gently placed her hand over mine as I looked down. Her touch gave me the courage to lift my head. I've regretted what happened 10 years ago every single day. Why couldn't I have gotten to Mom's hospital room sooner? Regret, self-reflection, and anger at myself. All these emotions overwhelmed me, spilling out as tears. My father gently placed his hand on my shoulder. It's okay. You don't need to cry anymore. I understand how you feel now. About 6 months later, Anna and I held our wedding. It was a modest ceremony with just close family and friends. Anna, in her wedding dress, was radiant and so beautiful that she took my breath away. Life is long, and I'm sure there will be many ups and downs ahead. There may even be stormy days, like that day on the road. But Anna and I understand the importance of family bonds. As long as we have that, I'm confident that no challenge will be too great to face together.